I'm Anthony here hosting in this Saturday special. We can say thank you enough for always joining us anytime you get that notification that we are live. And so again, we dearly want to say welcome and welcome to our broadcast. And as always, we will request that favor you never shy away from doing by hitting that share button and sharing the show with your contacts so that all of us, the Liberian community, can be part of the conversation. This one is a serious one. It's depressing sometimes. It has to do about our humanity, our brothers and sisters, especially the younger ones. Our topic, human trafficking in Liberia, the case of Maria Morgan Locan, the woman who is being alleged of trafficking Liberian children. Is that actually true? Is she involved in that situation? Well, to discuss all this, we have a gentleman, a brother, and a Liberian as well. He's no one else but Josh Johnson. We call him Josh Mervyn Action Johnson. He's here to show some actions legally. So don't be afraid. Don't run away because you see that beautiful beach behind him. He can be friendly, but ruthless legally because that's what he does for a living. Hey, we are here to discuss the issue of human trafficking. I'm excited, and I think Mervyn is as well. Welcome to Focus on Liberia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Brother CA. You have me cracking up over here. Thank you so much. What an intro. Thank you so much. I'm very happy and blessed to be here. Thank you.
All right. Our guest, George Mervyn T. Johnson there. Folks, again, let me remind you about this topic. It's so important that you need to pay attention. We are talking about human trafficking. I know we Liberians, we hear that word too often. We think it's happening in other countries, and we think sometimes it's not happening in our country. It's actually happening. But that's why we'll be looking into today to see whether that is actually happening. What is human trafficking, by the way? Well, Johnson will help us to provide some understanding around that, and that's why we got him in the hot seat. Just Johnson, again, I can't welcome you enough, but this time, who is Mervyn or Josh Mervyn T. Johnson? Your fellow Liberian want to know a little bit about you.
Well, thank you. First, let me start by praising God. Let me say, praise the Lord.
Amen to that.
Let me declare without fear or favor or hesitation that God is good all the time, and all the time God is good.
God is great. Like that.
Let me also extend my heartfelt thanks and appreciation to you and your staff, Dennis, Stephanie, and others for the work you're doing in bringing awareness to these issues, thereby stirring encouragement and activism for the betterment of our country, Mama Liberia. Let me also just say thank you to you and your staff for the work you're doing. Who is Just Johnson? Just Johnson is a child of God, a Liberian that for reasons known only to Almighty God that he's put his hand on. From a very young age, person that is now Just Johnson has been hearing that God has a plan for you. God has a plan for you. During my formative years, growing up in the great metropolis of Lakbasi, St.-Paul, Matadi area. Many have compared it to New York and Chicago, but I would leave them to continue that debate. But growing up there, I came from a broken home, a single parent home. I attended public schools. For those of us who grew up in Liberia that maybe attended public schools, we know what that meant. If your family sent you to public schools. Not only did I attend public schools, but in middle school, I attended demonstration, which is situated, some people may recognize in off of Camp Johnson Road, Clay Street area. But I had to take the public bus from Lakbasi, St. Paul area to G.W. Gibson on the Baptist daily, fight for a bus, as we say, fight for a ride to get to school to and fro. And so those were my very humble beginnings. Thereafter, my family got blessed, and we all of a sudden had some money, and I was able to matriculate to a much better school, which is Rick's Institute in Virginia. And I was on boarding school in Rick's for several years. I went there initially, as I said, from demonstration. So I was there in middle school, in the middle school dormitory, and I matriculated to high school. And then thereafter, by his grace, the Lord allowed me to come to the US. And I came to the US. I finished high school here, right here in Georgia. In fact, right here in the very county where I sit and talk to you. I have been here since high school. I finished high school here, and I went off to college at Georgia State University, downtown Atlanta. And I received all my degrees from Georgia State. The last degree to have received was a Juris Doctorate, doctorate in law in the year 2000. Since that time, I've worked as a jurist, as an activist, as a leader for our people. Mostly, I started off working as a public defender. I worked in the public defender's office in the state of Georgia. Depending on your performance, you're permitted to start practicing law even before you graduate law school with some supervision. And so I was fortunate to be selected to work for the public defender's office in Rockdale County. And so I worked there for some time trying cases. Thereafter, I was selected to work for a couple of firms. And not too long thereafter, I started my own firm serving our people, and I've been doing so since. So who is Judge Johnson? I'm a family man. I'm married. The Lord has blessed me bountifully with 6 children. Yeah, 3 boys and 3 girls. I am pleading with my wife and getting family members to urge her so we can get a tiebreaker so that we can get another boy so the men will rule the family and not the women. But
why not the woman?
That's another show. That's another show.
Yeah.
But so far, I have not been successful. And so in a nutshell, that's who I am. I'm a family man. I love the Lord. I bleed Liberia, Liberian, as I would say for people that know me. And I've tried to use that which the Lord has given me, not just to put bread or rice, since we're from Liberia, on the table for my family,
right.
Also to do my part in leading and fighting the cause for the least among us. So in a nutshell, that's who Judge Johnson is.
Well, thank you for that elaborate biography about yourself, autobiography, I think I should say, about yourself. And I think people listening to us now have gotten a better sense of who you are as a Liberian, and also your professional field of work, which really makes you best suited for this topic of human trafficking, because like you said yourself, as a public defender before, it is about the people, the public, to defend them. And that's why we thought to reach out to you, and we are so happy that you gladly accepted to sit with us. So let's start with understanding what we're here for to discuss. Human trafficking. To the ordinary man in Lakbasi, what is human trafficking? Speak to your friends in Lakbasi, the boys you left there.
Human trafficking is a nefarious, it's an illegal, it's a horrible practice of attempting basically to sell humans, to manipulate people for financial and other gains, to put it bluntly. And it is a big problem in Liberia. In fact, what I would like to do is to sort of expand the scope a little. We will focus, and I would give some detail on the particular case that I worked on, that the Lord had me work on. But I just want to start by giving a broader scope and giving some factual situations that are ongoing right now in Liberia. The reason being, this case that I worked on was back in 2008, 2009, 2010. And so it was a while ago. I don't want the listening audience to get the impression that this was so far, so far ago that this is no longer relevant. So just perusing through the current events in Liberia in the last 45 days, we will find that on April 22nd of this year, April 22nd of this year in Bonk County in Liberia, there were 8 suspects, eight people suspected of raping children that were released by the court there in a very controversial move. The government of Liberia is saying that they were not notified that the suspects were going to be released, that no motions were filed, but yet the judge, under very controversial situations, released the 8 that the judge had under the judge's custody, raping children. This is April 22nd of this year, last month. April 15th of last month in Nimba County, there was a 20-year-old that was alleged to have raped a 9-year-old child. The gender ministry Nimba representative, a Miss Ya Belly Sua, reported that that wasn't the only case that she was aware of locally, but they had 20 such cases locally. And in fact, they had enough that were so far unsolved that had not been prosecuted. She also indicated that there were another 10 cases of people assaulting, raping children, abusing children, etc., that the police told them they were investigating, but they were waiting on a police report. So according to this gender ministry representative, there are about 30 cases of this right now ongoing just in Nimba County alone.
Yeah.
April 4th, it was reported that a 54-year-old, and this is not to cast any aspersions on pastors, but it is alleged that a 54-year-old United Methodist pastor, he raped a 15-year-old congregant.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the United Methodist authorities in Liberia immediately removed him from his post while the matter has been investigated. On March 20 of this year, just a couple more, and then I'll transition. On March 20 of this year, in Zone 9 precinct there in the greater Monrovia area, one of the CID police officers who was called to investigate an alleged cell phone theft by a 16-year-old child, that police officer was now accused and arrested for raping that child in the precinct, in the jail. So, wow. Yeah, the very police that was sought to do an investigation of a cell phone or bonanza theft, that individual is alleged to have taken the suspect in the confines of the jail and to rape that suspect there. There are many other cases. I'll just quickly run over it. And an 11-year-old recently that was sodomized by and again, this is not also to cast any aspersions on Nigerians, but it was a Nigerian accused of raping, sodomizing an 11-year-old. That 11-year-old was taken to the local hospitals and clinics, moved around for proper treatment. Just to give you an idea how bad the situation is, the cost of the daily treatment for this child who had been raped and sodomized by this Nigerian allegedly was $25 a day. For those of us in the diaspora, just to give us some context, the father cries out to the media and the public and says that he only earns $3 a day. He works as a daily hire, who won work kind of thing.
Right.
So not afford the $25 a day to take care of the child that was receiving treatment. It was alleged that the Nigerian perpetrator's family had attempted to bribe the victim's family with $1,500 US so that the case would go away. There's been the case is of a 12-year-old student that was raped by the teacher over grades issue and so forth and so forth. Just in the year ending last year, 2019, according to credible sources on ground, there's been about 500, up to 500 such cases going on in Liberia. And so I present these factual statistics to begin the program, not to indicate that, yes, the case I'm going to talk about was also horrific. That case was during the period of 2008, 9, and 10. But this issue is something that's going on right now. While these cases that I pointed out are not necessarily human trafficking, where these children are being moved from one location to another, in my mind, in my book, it is equivalent. It's yet the same thing that's being done. These children are being violated and so forth. So what I'm hoping to do today, my brother CA, is to share my personal story, my personal testimony about this particular case that the Lord led me to work on, to remind people these things are still going on. It may not be going on in the trafficking context, but certainly in the equivalent violation context. My hope is that this will shed light on this widespread problems. As I indicated, 2019, there were 500 such cases in Liberia reported. My hope further is to encourage the listening audience and others that perhaps they talk to take the lead in this fight for these young children, for our people, for, as the Bible calls, the least among us, the children. And then lastly, I'm hoping to speak to President George Weah, the elected leader of our country, to take this issue very seriously, to hopefully play a major role, a public and major role, to bring about a prompt and a fair arrest and prosecution of these cases. These cases, as I repeat, needs to be promptly, these people need to be promptly arrested. They need to be promptly and fairly prosecuted publicly, so that we can have some confidence, some efficacy in our system and the public. By doing that, what happens is the leader now encourages the people to be more, to encourages more activism, because right. The potential activists feel encouraged when the leader is speaking on these issues and mandating fair and prompt prosecution. Also, calling on the president to create, if they haven't, or to maintain, if they have created, and publish some statistical data on these issues, again, to bring awareness to what's going on, because when it's dark, evil tend to fester in the dark, but when the leader shines light on issues, it makes it much more difficult for those evil-minded individuals to continue to do what they do, and thereby discouraging them. And so my hope is this is what we can get accomplished today.
Dr. Johnson, thank you. I know our topic here is human trafficking, but I like the picture you painted here. And I get the sense that your goal here is to look at what many of us know, which is rape, because it is alarming now in Liberia, and see the gravity of it. And then when we try to look at human trafficking, we will see that they are of equivalent, of magnitude. And it is good that, you try to pin that description so that, for us to have it in our mind graphically. I like that. And so I'm going to push you a little bit on the rape cases. Yes, you chronicle all the cases. And one I want to add that we talked about yesterday in our show, Dennis told us about, is this child at the age of 13 selling milk candy in Liberia, came across this gentleman. So he was in a maze of other people. So he said, I'll pay for the milk candy, give that person one, person two, So he gave everything out, and he told the lady, now follow me, I have the money at home. And his intention was to just go and abuse her, and he did so in Liberia. And this case is still pending. So of the many cases you name, when I was counting here, in Nima County alone, you mentioned 30 cases.
Yes, sir.
And there are multiple other cases out there.
Yes, sir.
And so sometimes I ask myself, when do we see this thing as serious as it is?
Mm. And mind you, these are the cases that have been reported.
Yeah.
The where we come from, oftentimes the history, the culture, the dynamics in the socioeconomics among our people, poverty, poor, power on not so powerful people, all of these factors bring pressure to bear on these victims and their family, fear, etc., to not report many of these cases. In fact, the case that I mentioned regarding the 11-year-old that has been allegedly sodomized by this Nigerian, this father has his 11-year-old child now in hiding, he reports. And he and his family are in fear because of the pressure they're receiving by having this seemingly accused, affluential Nigerian business person being locked up for this charge. And so you're absolutely right. This is something, again, that I'm hoping the leader of our nation, I don't mean just the minister or the information minister or any of the ministers, but this issue is quite serious. This issue not only speaks of the condition and the impact on our children, which is our future. And so my hope is that the leader will see reason, using our phraseology in Liberia, will see reason to get involved in this publicly, lend his weight and voice to the issue to discourage what's been happening.
Yeah, thank you for emphasizing that. And there's no other way you could have emphasized it enough for leaders and those listening, to see how serious it is, and then get to whoever they know in a position of power to do something about this. We are just tired of hearing this. It's what needed now is just action. The evidence are all over the place and they are overwhelming. So great picture that you painted. Now, human trafficking, what is it? How is it different from rape, if any?
Well, they're both one and the same in terms of the impact and the evil nature of it. The difference is in the movement of the victims.
Okay.
Whereas in a rape situation, typically the victim is not moved or kidnapped. Sometimes it does occur that way.
Right.
But human trafficking, these victims are often transported from their locality and, as what we're about to talk about in this specific case, from their country and sometimes from their continent. And so if a victim is injured, is violated, is hurt, certainly being in your locality, familiar territory does not make it easier for the victim, but you can only imagine being similarly violated, but yet you've been transported away to a whole nother country or another continent where the language, the culture, the food, the people are all foreign to you. And so those are some of the differences.
And sometimes when an individual is trafficked, transported to another country, the person involving in that act, they have a reason, they have a purpose, they have a goal. What is it?
Well, my brother, that's a very good question. If we knew the complete answer to that question, I think it would help all of us to curtail and decrease some of the occurrences. But some of what we've learned, right, there's some people that are just demonically possessed, in my view, that do these things to harm children. There's some people that have a whole slew of issues that they have, but regardless of what their issue is, our focus should be and has been on the victims. And so while they're possessed and they have all these other psychological, emotional, etc. issues that the professionals might outline, we're not paying that much attention to it. We're allocating our time and resources to the victim, as I tried to do in this case that was in Oklahoma.
Well, let's talk about the impact, this kind of behavior is having on the victims. Something similar to the rape cases you chronicle, talking about the victims as well. Mm-hmm. What impact psychologically, how does it affect their future?
My brother, honestly, I am not capable, I'm not worthy to capture in words the impact that I have personally witnessed in working on these cases, as we would discuss in some detail across America, mm-hmm. in liaising with other activists, attorneys, other professionals, as we would discuss in some detail, as I have, mm-hmm. as a result of these cases, and sharing the experiences and vicariously learning and living their experiences. You can't put it into words. The best I can do is say they basically destroy, in many cases, the entire human being. They destroy these children physically. The 11-year-old, as I mentioned, that's been allegedly sodomized by the Nigerian. She's undergoing medical treatment. She's been undergoing, I understand, for weeks. She would require surgery and so forth to try to repair her body as best as possible. So it damages these children physically, it damages them psychologically, emotionally. It's a total destruction. It's an attempt to totally destroy the human being.
Wow, I mean, as you were trying to give your understanding of how the behavior, damages the future and the life of the victim, I was looking for a way to even describe it. So you were right. There's no way you can put it in words for the victim to understand that you really get a sense of what they have to go through.
Yeah.
Now, let me give you the opportunity to do something for me and my audience. In your line of work, you have come across cases of this nature about trafficking. Paint a story, maybe a life or real life experience, a case you may have or you work on, and give me a unique understanding of, how these things play out.
Well, yeah, this story that has been in the media in Liberia involving a Maria Lucan.
Okay.
This story came about recently, as some of your listening audience may know, and for the benefit of those who are not aware, I would just quickly recap it.
Right.
But it's been reported that President Weah's government gave this lady a contract to feed those individuals that have been tested positive for the virus that we're all dealing with. And this contract ran in the tone of close to, I believe, $250,000. And there's reports of having options to renew it. $250,000 to feed, I believe, 200 people for 45 days or something to that effect. And many people, in light of the distressing economic condition the nation and our poor people are experiencing, such a contract for such an amount over such a period, and again, reportedly with options to be renewed, that raised the concerns of people to say, well, who is this lady? Why is she getting such a contract, etc.? And being concerned with the magnitude, the nature of the contract, that's when they learn, say, wait a minute, this lady is the lady that's been in the news before, involved with the children, etc., etc. And so let me share with you and my listening audience my involvement and my knowledge in this whole ordeal that involved Maria Lucan. So sometime in 2000, don't quote me on the dates, it's been a while. Pulling from memory, memory phase with time. But sometime in 2008 or so, in the summertime, I received a phone call from a Caucasian lady in Oklahoma. This lady called me and we basically started a conversation where she appeared to be interviewing me, asking me questions. If I was the Attorney Johnson who had worked on a case where the police had murdered one of our own Liberians here in Georgia in 2004, 5 years or so before. I said, yes, ma'am, I was the one. She asked me if I was the same Melvin Johnson who had traveled to Rhode Island to fight for another Liberian who was wrongfully facing life in prison. I said, yes. Are you the same Melvin Johnson who went to New Jersey to fight for another? I said, man, okay, you've got me. What is it? What's going on?
Right.
So I began to explain this story of how 5 precious Liberian girls, 5 sisters, were adopted by one family in Oklahoma. She made me to understand that these 5 children, their mother, in the process of childbirth and labor to daughter number 5,
Right.
died. And so the father reportedly could not handle all of the responsibilities. He turned these 5 children over to a local orphanage there in Liberia for kids.
Liberia.
And I understood then this is how Maria connected with this. Maria and her company connected with this orphanage, connected this Caucasian family in Oklahoma. They adopted these 5 children, I believe in 2004 or 5, somewhere thereabouts, and they brought these children to the US. The family, the Caucasian family, was comprised of a mother, a father, a teenage son, and a teenage or a 20-year-old, I believe, somewhere thereabouts, daughter. They adopted these 5 sisters. They brought them to the US. At the time that they adopted these children ranged in age from 4 months. So a little young baby, 4 months old, and the oldest of these girls, she was 12 years old at the time, and they brought them to Oklahoma. And the lady began to explain further that this family systematically was torturing family members, were raping, abusing these children. All of these children suffered various forms of torture, abuse, and rape, and so forth. And that other well-meaning, good Caucasian families in the area interfered, called the police. The police came, they investigated. The 4 family members, the father, the mother, the son, and the daughter, they all admitted that these things had happened. But then the police and the court, to the surprise of this lady on the phone with me and others, told the family they could go home with what is called an OR, or a signature, which means you don't have to pay any money, you don't have to put up any property. You can merely just sign your name and you can go home. People who have not had much interaction with the system, that is not even done for a traffic ticket. If you're charged with violating a stop sign and there are other reasons that lead to you going to jail, you would likely have to put up some money just for that traffic offense. They would rarely tell you to sign your name, certainly not for charges of rape, certainly not for charges of rape of children and torture of children. But this is what the people running the system in Oklahoma did at the time. Naturally, unfortunately, that alarmed the lady that had called me and others. They had formed a little group. They referred to themselves as the prayer warriors. And so this alarm and concerned the prayer warriors. They called me. And so that was my intro to getting involved. I told her I would pray about it and to send me documentation. Long story made short, after I prayed about it, I was convinced that the Lord was telling me, yeah, this is a fight that I want you to take on, that I want you to lead. And so I jumped in the fight and I went to Oklahoma as quickly as I could. Let me give a testimony in the story right here.
Okay.
About the goodness of the Lord. Normally, my brother, if an individual is in Oklahoma and they have a criminal case, they've got charges pending against them,
right.
I think all of us, or most of us, understand that a lawyer out of Georgia, where I live, cannot merely get on an airplane and fly to Oklahoma and get involved in that case.
Wow.
And so that's something I think most in the public understand. But certainly I, as an experienced jurist, I understood it as well. But in a sense, the Lord blinded my thinking, and I was so filled with passion and compassion that I went to Oklahoma without really reflecting on the details of the modalities of how I would be admitted on this case.
Right.
Long story short, I fly up to Oklahoma. These same people, the prayer warriors who I had never met, they pick me up from the airport. We drive about 2 hours. This is a very rural area. We drive from Oklahoma City about 2 hours to this little town called Fairview, Oklahoma. We get there, and I'm driven to one of the prayer warriors' home, and we get to the house, and there's about 30 people there. They've got cocktails, refreshments, etc., set up, and they've got a table for me to address them. And they say they make the announcement. The attorney, the judge from Georgia that we told you about, he's here. He's going to fight for these girls. He's going to free these girls. Can we have everybody be quiet so that he can tell us what the plan is and what he wants us to do? And literally, my brother and the listening audience, it was at that moment that, if I may put it this way, that my mind was free. And I realized, oh my goodness,
right.
I can't just jump in on this case. There's a process I've got to go through.
Right.
I'm permitted by the judge here locally. I've got to be permitted by the system. Oh my goodness. Now, the other part of it is, if I had honestly reflected on all the details, I likely would not have gone at the time that I did to Oklahoma. I likely stayed in Georgia to go through the process more carefully, et cetera, because when you do these kinds of works, you're under tremendous attacks from the people that you're trying to shed light on, the people you're trying to have prosecuted. These are very powerful people, very well connected. Oftentimes they have resources. So long story short, I sit there, and this lady announcer says, yeah, he's going to tell us what to do. And I'm sitting there, and I'm literally praying. I'm saying, Lord, you need to help me. I came here to help your children. And so the idea came to mind, tell them that you want to be taken to the courthouse. This is on a Friday. So I tell them, I say, listen, I will go ahead and make the announcement, but if you would take me quickly to the courthouse before they close. It's about shortly after noontime at this point. Take me to the courthouse before they close. Let me see if I can get a chance to talk to the judge. They drive me to the courthouse. I go upstairs, knock on the door. This lady comes out. She sees me. She's startled, perhaps because there are no Black people living in that town. I was told there had never been any Black people that had ever lived there. And so she was somewhat surprised from seeing this relatively big, dark Black man standing before her. Long story short, I requested to speak with the judge. Normally, when you have those credentials, as I did, invite you in, they will put you in a sitting area to bring the judge to have discourse. But standing at the door in the hallway, she closed the door slowly in front of my face and told me to wait right here, and goes inside to bring the judge. The judge comes out, he opens the door, he's standing in the doorway. The judge's name, by the way, was Vincent Barefoot, like your foot is bare, barefoot.
Yeah, barefoot.
Barefoot comes up, he stands to the doorway, he says, can I help you? I said, Your Honor, I present my credentials to him. I said, is it possible we can sit down somewhere in your office? He reluctantly says, yeah, come on, let's go. So we go in his office, we sit there, and I present what I thought was compelling reasons as to why he voluntarily permit me to fight for these children.
Exactly.
He looks at me, he says, that's it? I said, yes. This is what I told him. I said, Your Honor, these are my credentials. I'm a Liberian as well. As you see, I'm not only a lawyer, but I serve as a chief judge in Lithonia, Georgia. Yeah. And I've heard about this case involving these children, so I've come to ask your permission to put me on the case as one of the lawyers for these children. I think it is in your interest to do that because the case is already getting publicity, that there's concerns of racism and so forth that may occur. If you were to appoint a black person like me, a Liberian, these kids are from Liberia, then perhaps it would alleviate the stigma that you're racist. So I kind of took that angle, hoping that would entice him to appoint me. To my surprise, the judge looked at me and said, "No, I'm not going to do that. Thank you." And he says, "You can see your way out." So I walk back out. The people are waiting on me. We go back to the house where all these people are. The idea that I came up with, thinking I could convince this judge to get on the case, had failed. We get back now to all these people, and God is so good, my brother, in the listening audience. While I'm sitting there with literally thinking, God, you need to help me. I am here for these children. I don't know what to do. The people say, yeah, okay, so y'all be quiet. The lawyer is back now. He's met with the judge. He will brief us on what they discussed and the strategy and what we can do. And I literally had nothing to tell them.
You had nothing to say.
As I'm sitting there, just crying out in my spirit, so to speak, unto God, my cell phone rings. And I reach in my pocket, I answered it. This individual on the phone was talking, but wasn't clear. But I repeated the name that I heard. And I said, while I was on the phone with the individual, I said, Barefoot.
Yeah. And
one of the ladies adjacent to me whispered, oh, that's the judge. I had forgotten his name. So basically, while I had just met with him, I gave him my card, my cell number. He was calling me back, but I had forgotten his name. I didn't even know who he was. So long story short, he called me. He says, Attorney Johnson, come back to the office. Let's talk. So now I tell them, okay, well, he's calling me. Let me go back. Sorry, y'all wait, blah, blah, blah. So we
drove away again.
Yeah, we drive back to the courthouse. And this is the point of it all. This is the testimony. We get there and I go upstairs. I sit and I look at this man who is clearly very evil, very racist. He says, you know, Attorney Johnson, today is my day off. I'm not scheduled to work.
Oh, wow.
Yes. He says, additionally, I have a ranch in Texas, the bordering neighboring state.
Right.
He says, and usually when I have a long weekend such as this, my wife and I, we go off to our ranch. He says, and so that was the plan. I packed everything. We got in the truck and I was heading to the ranch.
Right.
He says, but I realized that I had forgotten some stuff in the office. And so that caused me to turn around and come to the office to get the paperwork, the files that I had forgotten that I want to peruse over, over the weekend, do some work.
Right.
Says literally as I'm getting the file is when I hear you knocking on the door and my assistant comes and says, you need to speak to me.
Yeah.
I said, oh, that's quite interesting. He says, when I told you earlier, no, I would not admit you on the case. I packed up my files. I went downstairs. I got back in the truck with my wife. We started driving off to Texas. Then he said something interesting. He says, but something But something compelled me, something made me to turn around and come back and call you. And of course, I knew what that something was, that was the Holy Spirit. But he said, something made me to turn around and come back. But what you said, it makes sense. So I will go ahead and appoint you on the case. So long story short, in a very miraculous way, that's how I officially started working on the case. So I started working on the case, which meant now these children were my clients.
Judge Johnson, hold on. Let's take a deep breath. That was a smooth ride, but I want my audience, some people are just joining. Take a little water break. Let me remind them, folks in cyberspace, we are discussing human trafficking in Liberia. The case of Maria Morgan Loken, the lady who is being accused of trafficking Liberian children. She says she is running a program that she's using to adopt Liberian children and bring them to the United States to give them a better future. So we brought in Judge Johnson to be able to make us to understand how the whole trafficking thing works, whether or not it's actually happening in Liberia. And from his experience, he's talking about some Liberian children that were brought to the United States and were abused, and he tried to get on top of the case. So all the processes he had to go through to get over the case, that's why he was just explaining. And the reason he's explaining there is so we can establish that yes, child trafficking or human trafficking is happening in Liberia. People have been transported from Liberia to the United States and other parts of the world as well and have been abused. So I wanted to provide that context so that those of you who just joined in and following the story will understand it. So he made the effort, and finally, he got the legal blessing to get over this case to fight for these Liberian children. Judge Johnson, you can continue, sir.
Thank you, thank you. So now officially I'm on the case and I'm working, but there's several challenges. Several years ago, many years ago in Sweden, there was a bank robbery that occurred. And during that bank robbery, what ended up happening, long story made short, the victims that were in the bank at the time,
right,
they ended up turning against the police and feeling sorry for the perpetrators.
Right.
That in the psychology world and social science world became known as the Stockholm syndrome, where people who have been victimized, in some instances, they end up having affinity or likeness for their perpetrators. And so sometimes you who go in to help them to fight against the perpetrators,
right,
sometimes their affinity lead them to start to fight against you.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't happen in every case, but this is something I've experienced in other places, in other cases before. And so as I'm putting together the vision for this fight, that's of course one of the things that goes through my mind, because these are children. These children, remind you, are still living with these evil people. These people are still feeding and caring for these children. And so they spent the most time with these children. They're still influencing these children. And so here I am now, this guy from Georgia, coming in, flying in weekly, sometimes multiple times a month, trying to put their whole family in prison for rape, torture, and so forth.
Right.
It is to be expected that they would fight back. It is to be expected that whatever resources they have, they're not just going to sit back and allow me to easily win this fight. And so I bring this up to say that was a concern of mine as I was strategizing. It was a concern because in America, people are and should be very sensitive regarding children. And so when you've got this guy coming in, these kids have been abused, the Stockholm syndrome and what this family could possibly do to one or some of these children against me, turning this against me was a real risk for me. Because I was and I am a family man. I've got my own challenges. This was a fight that I was expanding my family resources on. This was a fight that nobody gave me a penny, that I didn't ask for a penny. This was a fight that required, as one can imagine, airplane tickets, multiple times, about 20 or so times airplane tickets. This was a fight that required hotel costs, car rentals, meals, etc. And so it was a huge risk for me. And so long story short, I put together the vision for this to sort of treat these children as my own children. At the time, I had 2 daughters. Now I have 3. To take every time I go with me to visit these children, to take milk candy, rummy candy, you know, some of our different delicacies and desserts that these kids had not had in 5 years.
Wow.
Try to take some of our dishes, you know, try to take some potato greens, cassava leaf, palm butter, different things, again, that these children had not had for a very long time. And to build the bond and the trust.
The bond, yeah.
With myself. So long story made short, the point of the case, the issue, as we say in the legal world, the issue of the case was whether this judge should allow these children to be separated from this family until the entire investigation had concluded. Initially, as I mentioned in court, the judge had ruled that the children should stay with the family until the investigation concluded. And we felt, and everybody felt, that number one, that was just wrong. But number two, it wasn't giving the case a fair chance. You cannot have the perpetrators still continue to have control, dominion, influence over the victim, and expect the victim to be objective going forward. And so essentially that was the fight. I also realized that we needed help of many people. This wasn't something that I could do on my own. Fortunately, I was blessed with the assistance of the prayer warriors who called me into the fight.
Right.
We casted a vision, a plan to make the fight as big as possible, to include as much media, civic organizations as possible. And so there were many meetings to bring on board, for example, the local NAACP, their chairman and president locally, to bring them on board, to plan marches, to plan vigils. There were many meetings to bring on different groups. There was a bikers group that we had. There was another group headed by one of the prayer warriors called Weep No More. There were efforts made, successful efforts, to bring in the Liberian Pastors Association in the Oklahoma area. Many of them participated. There were efforts at contacting the Liberian embassy at the time to get them involved. And then, so at the root of all of this, I learned that there was a lady in reference to these children's case by the name of Maria Lucan. I learned that at the time she was a Liberian who had naturalized, that she resided, I believe, in Eden Prairie,
Minnesota.
Yeah, and that there was an ongoing investigations. I also learned that there were other cases in the U.S. in California. There were cases in Seattle, I believe, and some other places. There were cases in Canada. And so all of a sudden I was now communicating, liaising, not with people to plan in terms of the marches and the rallies and the vigils, but then there's a part of me that I'm giving to that group of individuals. There's a part of me that I'm giving to people who have interest or have experiences with the case, like other families in Canada. So I'm communicating with people in Canada, the Liberian embassy. But then I also learned, in terms of the focus, the strategy, the legal strategy for the case, I learned that this family who had violated these children, they had a child who was now an adult that they had previously violated. And this individual was in Colorado. And so my travels for this case not only took me, as I said, about 20 times or so back and forth from Georgia to Oklahoma, but it took me to Colorado. It took me to Washington, D.C. I was fortunate to get in touch. You want to go ahead and say something?
Yeah, let me inject something, which is key. I know sometimes we say violated. Give us a descriptive understanding of the level of violations or abuse that these children suffer.
Sure.
Were they more than treated as slaves? Were they allowed to go to school while they were with this family that supposedly adopted them? What were the kind of treatment they were going through? Right.
Very good point. So the treatment were multiple. There were over time. There were rape. As I mentioned, the family had a teenage boy, young man, I should say, who was 19 years old, I believe, at the time. As a reminder, these children were between the ages of 4 months old and 12 years old when they were brought to the U.S. So 4 months old and 12 years old. And this 19-year-old took turns raping all of these children, sexually assaulting them, etc., at his leisure.
Wow.
Family's daughter, who was 20 or 21 at the time, there were several times where she would deprive the children of food. There were times she would beat them with whole, the whole we use on Rick's Institute when I was there.
Right. Yeah.
To cut grass, beat them with rakes, leaving marks on them, contusions on them. The mother would do the same thing. The father would also do the same thing. The abuse perhaps culminated. What led to the point where it was reported was that the family, this evil family, had concluded that these children needed some kind of deliverance, as they phrased it. Yeah. Imagine that, right? They concluded that these children needed deliverance from a, quote, African demon. And so they ordered the children, these young kids, to fast for 7 days.
Without food.
Yeah, to order them to fast. And so the kids actually starved after the first day. Day two, the second oldest daughter, she decided enough is enough. When the dad had gone to work, she got up in defiance, went and took food from the refrigerator, made food for herself and her siblings, and gave everybody food to eat. When the dad came home and he was told of what she had done,
oh my God,
his idea of punishment was to beat her first, almost to a pulp. After beating her, taking her and tabeing her, as we would say in Liberia, and then tying her to a tree, half dressed, outside in rural country Oklahoma. When I say rural country Oklahoma, even during my drives from the airport to this town,
you would, 2 hours drive.
Yeah, you would run across wild animals crossing the streets. That's how rural it was. And when I say wild, I don't mean deer, I mean coyotes, bobcats,
wow,
those kinds of things. So this is the area that this adult decided to have this child spend the night outside, crying, screaming, with cuts on her, lacerations, contusions all over her body, screaming. And so this is the nature of what they had done to these children.
Wow. And I needed to ask that, and I'm glad you're able to give that descriptive understanding of the level of abuse these children had gone through. And when you were explaining earlier, I wanted to ask whether the parents were aware of their 19-year-old son abusing these children. But then in your explanation, you answered that parents will have unique knowledge of their child abusing somebody else's children, and they feel it's okay, or because they claim they have adopted these children. It's just mind-boggling. But again, it speaks to the area they live, in a village, to say, in America. So I want you to give my audience also, you've been here for some time, our Caucasian brothers and sisters, many of them who live far in the forest, who are not close or to the cities. I don't know the right word to use, that no country or primitive, but the way they look at others, especially the way we look, is different. And does that inform their behavior, that what they were doing to these children was justified in any way?
That is a powerful and very loaded question, and a right question. Yeah. It's evil. There's no way to justify it. It's evil. The word of God says in Genesis 1:27 that God created man in his image. And so my approach was that these children were God's precious creations. The Bible says in another verse that we are all fearfully and wonderfully made. Yeah. So that was my approach. And so to answer your question, there are varying evil views that people use, justifications as to why they do what they do. But my focus has been that these are God's children made in his image. These are God's children that were fearfully and wonderfully made. And so they deserve to be treated the same way my own children that God gave me out of my loins would have been treated. And so moving on with the story, after learning about all this violation, we're trying to get these kids out. And so over a period of close to a year, as we're waiting for the trial, I'm going back and forth. I'm sharing the legal strategy with these children. I'm trying to convince these children to build courage, to speak against basically the only parents they've ever known, to speak against basically the only family they've ever known. Of course, the family speaking to them when they go home, and preparing them and putting fear in them and threatening them. And so these kids are hesitant in the beginning to want to fully cooperate. The Stockholm syndrome that I described earlier, without going into much detail, I was experiencing some of that. I was getting some signs and symptoms of that. And so this story ultimately ended well, but I say that to make a point that there were some touchy and trying moments over the year and a half or so that I went through this process. And so long story short, I was fortunate to break through with these kids after meeting with them several times for several months. They eventually came on board and started agreeing to testify against the family. I essentially promised them that if they would do so, they would be free from this family, that they would not have to go back to their so-called mom and dad and brother and sister after having testified against them in open court in an effort to put them in prison.
Right.
Clearly, the children understood the risk that if they would refer to me as Uncle Melvin, they would say, Uncle Melvin, if we testify and it doesn't work,
what becomes of us?
Yeah, what becomes of us? And so my assurance to them was be bold, be courageous, let's trust God, that when you testify, that will be enough that from the courthouse, you would not go back home. And so very long story short, we did the rallies, we did the marches, we did the prayer vigils, we got all kinds of people involved. We got the media involved. We got the international media involved. We were having press conferences. Media from Canada were present because there were Liberian children, I believe close to 30 that had also been adopted, taken to Canada. And there was some maltreatment that were occurring there as well. I had gone to Washington, D.C. in an effort to persuade the then U.S. Ambassador Matt Barnes. I went on Capitol Hill. I had meetings with the senators, the two senators from the state of Oklahoma, right. Senator Inhofe and the other senator, his name escapes me. I had meetings with members of the House of Representatives from Oklahoma because I wanted them to be aware, to put a face with who was leading this fight,
right,
on in their backyard. Going to Colorado, trying to convince these evil people's son to come and testify, and all this stuff going on, as you can imagine. Long story short, we get to the day of the trial, the day we've all been waiting for, all the efforts, all the pressure, all the media pressure from within, without. Mind you, when you're leading these efforts, for example, on the public relation part of this fight, you've got these different groups. Everybody's on the same side. Everybody's angry about what is happening with these children. But oftentimes it becomes a tough sell to sell the overall vision that everybody will comport to, everybody will follow. Some people want to be very aggressive. Some people want to basically almost start a riot. So you have to control that. And those that appear to be super aggressive, they start to accuse you of not being aggressive enough. Then some people that don't want to be as aggressive, and so they're accusing you of being too aggressive. And so within the camp of all these strangers that I just met, there was just so much going on that we're dealing with. Then you've got the legal part of it where I'm dealing with these children, trying to manage their emotions, their expectations, trying to inspire them, trying to give them courage. And then there's the other part of the legal where I'm trying to get witnesses and all these people to get involved in. And so after all this goes on, now also too, there's also another part where the family, I believe, were attacking me, were attacking my license at the time. They were filing stuff against me here in Georgia, creating allegations. And so I was having to deal with some of that in Georgia as well. And so, but anyway, as a leader, this is what you sign up for. You have to know how to multitask. So we get to the
Josh Levin, let me pause you one more time. I see a few people telling us I'm just joining. So let me remind them that we are discussing human trafficking in Liberia. It says something that ever happened or happening in Liberia. If it ever happened in Liberia, is there a case that we can point at with evidence to support it, to establish that yes, human trafficking has happened in Liberia at some time, and maybe some individuals were involved? Maria Morgan Loken, I think that's the name, is the woman who we know, as were reported in the media, who claimed or said that she has been, running an adoption program for many Liberian children, and she trying to give these Liberian children a better future. She granted front page an interview, and she told her whole story. But then other people are accusing her that these children she's been taking from Liberia, she more like been selling them, using the Liberian way of putting it. But people who understand what trafficking is, they think this is trafficking because these children were turned over to some family in the US in a lot of cases, in other areas, like Job Johnson explained. And these children have been subjected to all kinds of abuses, some of which Judge Johnson was able to describe. In this particular case that he was able to handle and fight legally, these children were given to a family, a white family in Oklahoma, and they abused the children. And those were the descriptions you heard him explaining how the children were treated, rapes and all were involved. Flocking, I'm talking about severe flocking, subjecting them into forced fast, meaning that they don't have to eat for a number of days. That's the kind of treatment they receive. And he decided as a Liberian, he would stand up for these children to free them. And all the tough processes he went through, that's the story he's telling right there. So Judge Johnson, please continue.
Yeah, it's worth noting too that I should point out another aspect to the fight of everything that was going on.
Right.
So at this time, politically in Liberia, we had a new government. We were all very excited. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first duly elected female African head of state. Of course, we're coming out of the wars, the various wars that we had. And we all wanted the country to move forward. And so, of course, there were efforts by the government then to try to give the country a positive face, bring investors and so forth into the country. And so all of that is going on while I'm leading this fight on this side in the US. As I mentioned, not only were my children violated in Oklahoma, this specific case that I was working on, but there were violations in other states in the US as well. There were also violations in Canada. And so this fight allowed me to liaise with other interested parties in Canada. And so before I knew it, and as I mentioned, I went on Capitol Hill to meet with the members of the US Congress, Colorado, et cetera. Initially, when I got this call, I was thinking I'm going to try to get in this case, fight for these kids in Oklahoma, but I had no idea that this matter would become not just a national matter here in the US, an international matter involving Canada and deeply involving Liberia. And so apparently I later learned that the members of the US Congress, their staff, began to ask questions of our president, and then government. Long story short, the pressure led to the point where the government in Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf's government, was forced to stop and review how they were going through the process of adopting these children. Unfortunately, the government at the time felt they needed a scapegoat to explain to the people. And so I was used as that scapegoat. I was defamed and denigrated at the time in the media as being this powerful Liberia in the U.S. that is spoiling the country's name, that is bringing down the country. You know, we're trying to move forward after the war. We're trying to rebuild. Instead of Liberians in the diaspora speaking kindly about the country, they're spoiling the country name. They're closing doors for others to go America just because he's in America. He doesn't want others to have opportunities. And so I was also being attacked by people in Liberia and here in the US that were supporters of the government in Liberia at the time.
Right.
Just to give you an idea of all the different fights, battles, if you will, that were all going on in this war at the time. To give you some context further, the government of Liberia finally, on January 26th of 2009, in her address to the country, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was forced, if for those historians around, go ahead and research it. She was forced in her State of the Nation address to announce that they would stop all of the adoptions.
Okay, that's the moratorium I heard about that time then.
Yes, and so I can tell you personally and my family, for that to happen, I suffered a lot. I took a lot of beating for that fight. To also give your listening audience some context before I get to the trial, Liberia at the time from 2003, these are statistics that were provided to me from contacts at the U.S. Embassy there in Liberia. At the time, between the year 2003 and 2008, this is not counting 2009 and so forth, Maria Lukin's organization and other organizations such as hers, it's noteworthy that she wasn't the only person doing this, but she did the bulk, the majority of the adoptions, okay? She wasn't the only person, but she did the most of it. That during that time, from 2003 to 2008, around 1,200 plus of our children were adopted through this process. I was also put in contact with two individuals, speaking about Maria, I was put in contact with two individuals that told me they had worked with Maria, a Caucasian lady and a Liberian gentleman. Both of them described to me basically that human trafficking was occurring, that Maria was engaged in human trafficking. They described to me that basically they knew, Maria knew, people that worked for Maria knew that there were situations that where the adoption did not meet up to the standard as required. But
by law.
Right, but hands were shook in Liberia.
Hands were twisted, as we say in Liberia.
Brown envelopes were distributed, and so things were covered up. And so what ended up happening were that these children were put in danger in many situations where they had no business being put in danger. So these are two individuals that represented that they directly worked for Maria in all my coordinations in this process that I talked through the U.S. Embassy that shared this information with me. And so that's why I concluded clearly based on the information they gave me. And by the way, I still have documentation. If the leadership in Liberia is listening and they are interested in pursuing any of this, I still have much documentation. To give you an idea, the case file, the paperwork for this case, with all the stuff could fill up a small closet with boxes. Just the enormity of the documentation that I went through, not just in terms of pleading the case, but you know, the different organizations, the history of these organizations, planning all this stuff, the different segments of the case that I mentioned, it was quite voluminous. And so just to give you an idea of what was going on. The U.S. Embassy at the time was also forced to issue a statement in late 2008. This led, as I mentioned, to President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf being forced in her 2009 State of the Nation address to make a proclamation to the people. And so now we get to the trial. I'm feeling somewhat confident. We've had a multitude of press conferences, so I felt that there was awareness We've got probably half a dozen different activist groups that have come together under some agreement of how to work together, because you got to control people, who talks to the media, what they say, what they don't say, what words they use. All of those things can reflect somewhat negatively on the effort that I was leading. And so you've got to coordinate all of that, who can speak, and it's a whole process, as you can imagine.
And Jeff Johnson, this will be quick. At this time, going to trial, where were the children? Were they in a safe place at this time, under your supervision?
The judge had refused. The part of the reason that really angered the prayer warriors that called me, the people running the system in Oklahoma, they had refused to separate these children from the violators, from the perpetrators.
Wow.
Normally, for those of us in the diaspora, I think we understand this. You even take a belt and you whoop or hit your child, and it creates welts, marks on that child.
Right.
They call the DFACS, the local Department of Family Children Services, and they come over. They will automatically remove that child that has those marks on him or her
from that home.
They will also likely remove the other children in the home that don't have any marks. They will remove those children. They will go through an investigation process. At the conclusion of that investigative process, they would determine whether those children should be placed back with you then undergoing some kind of rehabilitative counseling, or to permanently remove those children. I have never seen any other case where they conclude that the children should stay with the perpetrators while they do the investigations. But this is what these people had done.
I can imagine how fearful, further and further, they became at the time. Why, if the case does not go our way?
Yeah, keep in mind, let me be a little bit more vivid. So we've got all these activist groups. They're marching, they're rallying, they've got placards. They're marching in front of these people's homes. They're camping out there. You've got international media that is camping out in front of these people's homes that are in this town, asking questions. They're all over the place. And so the pressure that we planned was enormous on this family. And the hope was that the pressure also would not only be enormous on the family, but the decision makers in the system to make the decision to liberate these children. And so, to put it in context, this is what these kids were dealing with. Before, these kids were in a rural town that nobody kind of knew them and noticed them. And all of a sudden, they couldn't come outside of these evil people home to play because people were taking pictures. There were camera, there were activist people, they were rallying, they had placards, they were calling the family names. It was a whole pandemonium going on, just to give you some context. And so in the midst of all of this, we finally get to the trial. We got the son of this evil family, the adult son. He makes his contribution to the case. The children, they did well. They spoke boldly, courageously, and truthfully about what happened. Other people, witnesses who had observed the behavior of these children before and after, they testified, and all of that happened. We went on for hours and hours. And finally, I got a chance to give my closing argument, as we call it. I spoke, and I timed myself to speak for 1 hour and 1 hour only. I didn't want to be too long, but I also wanted to be very comprehensive and to put everything out there. And as best as I could, as emotionally as I could, as powerfully as I could, I poured out myself literally for these children. The judge, after listening to all that, did not even take a recess. After listening to all that, he hit his gavel and says, "Okay, I'm ready to rule." And he looked at me and looked at these children, looked at all these people in this jam-packed courtroom. There are people, of course, the courtroom is completely full. There are people outside the courtroom. There's people fill out the entire courthouse, all in the hallways. There are people out in the street in this little town. There's all these media vans and satellites, projecting out of the vans. I mean, that's kind of the scenery of what's going on.
Right.
This very evil judge looked at me and all these people, these children, and said that based on everything he heard, that he didn't see a reason why these children should be removed from this home.
My goodness.
Yes. And that the children should continue to live with their parents, and that the DFACS, the Department of Family Children Services, should go ahead and do whatever investigation and make whatever recommendation, et cetera, which in essence meant that we had lost the case, because the whole objective of me going there a year plus before, all this effort, spending all these resources, not just money, but other resources as well. The efforts of all these people coordinating, picking up people from the airport. I mean, just a process.
Wow.
All of it seemingly had been lost.
In a single minute.
When he made that decision, the courtroom, of course, they had a team of officers because they expected that this was a very emotionally charged case. Either way, after the judge's decision, they expected that there would be some disturbances. And so there was an army of law enforcement officers. After his decision, people were screaming, people were yelling, people were disorderly. It sounded like people were fighting or wanting to fight the judge. Police officers are running here, tackling people. I mean, just a complete mess.
I can't imagine that.
In the midst of all of that, I remember fixing my countenance, my eyes on these children, and the judge orders them to go back to the family. So the officers have to come and get the children to go back. The children are holding on to the rails of the chair. They're screaming, no, no, no. The officers are cheering them apart from the chair.
Jesus Christ.
Arms, you gotta go. They're turning to me, they're screaming, you promised, Uncle Melvin, look what you did. They're gonna kill us now, you promised. How can you do this? I mean, it's...
Wow, that was tormenting for you, Melvin. That was tormenting because you least expected they kind of ruling.
Yeah, well, I mean, these are human beings. These are children. They had become my children. And so in the midst of all of this, honestly, the tears were in my eyes. I had to, because I'm leading all of this. So I had to lead all these people. I can't sit there and be crying. The camera's fixed on me. Other people are crying. They're coming to lean on me to console them. And of course, they don't know the bond, the intimacy that I had developed with these children.
The children.
And the effect on me. And of course, afterwards, I had to rally all these people, NAACP, this group, that group, da-da-da-da-da. Everybody squeezed into a room and outside the room, so I could tell everybody thank you for their efforts. People had questions. What's gonna happen now? You know, let's burn down the courthouse. This is not right. We're gonna burn down this house. People angry. I mean, just
my goodness.
I'm laughing now, but I was broken then. I was in tears. And so long story short, with all these people fixated on me, I thank all of them. I praise God. I declared again that God is still good all the time, and all the time God is good, even though we were not feeling that way at that moment. I thank all of them for their efforts. I encourage them that God is not asleep. He doesn't sleep nor slumber, as the word of God says. And that honestly, I didn't know what would happen next, but I was trusting God. And I said a few other words of encouragement to them. The prayer warriors, the people there locally, people are just crying. It's just unbelievable. So I encourage them to pay attention to the children, since they live there locally, to just drive by regularly and go by the school, do what you can and keep an eye on these children. I would try to be coming back to Oklahoma, and then let the Lord lead me, and we'll take the fight from there. Let me also put something in context. And in doing so, let me give a shout out to somebody here in Georgia. To give you an idea personally of some of what I was going through, when you sign up and say you're going to represent somebody in another state in a highly contested matter as this, and the judge in the case senses that you're trying to expose him because he's planning on being evil. The lawyers there, the officials there, the family, the wicked family, all these people, they see you without, of course, expressing it, that you're an enemy. And so they use all the powers, all the influence they have to try to destroy you. That's what enemies do, right? The Bible says of our ultimate enemy, he comes to kill, to steal, and to destroy. And so one of the tactics that this judge was using is I would get an email sometimes on a Wednesday. I would get an email on a Wednesday, and the email would say to the effect towards the end of the day on a Wednesday that the judge has decided to have an emergency hearing on Friday because he wants to review some matters that are pertinent to the case. Now, I live in another state.
Yeah, how do you get there?
I have family here. I have other cases here that are already scheduled. Normally, the court would give you at least 2 weeks notice. And so I was basically, my point is I was being set up several times so that I would miss the court hearing. And if I missed the court hearing, then they could go after my license to say that this lawyer is not serious. He's abandoning cases that he has. He's not showing up, that sort of thing. And, you know, to ultimately try to punish me. And so one instance, and this is why I'm bringing up this story, one of my favorite people here in Georgia is a pastor, Pastor Lawrence Kennedy, if I may call out his name. Mm-hmm. I refer to him as my favorite. He lived at the time near the airport. And so in one of these very tense times where they had just surprised me with a new court date, I'm trying to cancel my engagements here. I'm trying to catch a flight. Mind you, Oklahoma is not New York City, where there are multiple flights all throughout the day. Most of the flights over there, they cease around 4 p.m. It's a very small airport, the size of Robertsfield Airport. Go ahead, my brother.
Yeah, so we are pushing a little, so 2 hours, and audience watching, they want to see the conclusion, and they want to also interact with you and get some questions. So let's do this. Let me read a few comments from them. Mm-hmm. And I want you to get ready to interact with our audience here. The phone lines also open. Those who are watching on Facebook, you want to call in, I just open the phone line. You can call in quickly. Let me read a comment here from Mosun Stewart, and they try to tarnish your good reputation for doing good. Musu, again, I mean, I'm shaking listening to this. I lost all the comments because I went to something else, but there were multiple comments. Some will come again. But what I want you to do is just end the story, how far it is, where are the children now, and, you know, and then you can interact with our audience.
Sure. So as I said, that day we lost the case. I came back to Georgia very depressed, very broken. Not understanding at the time that God had a bigger plan for the case. The following week, I received a call from the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, who explained to me that he had received a call from the governor of Oklahoma, who explained to him that he had been notified of this case. Very long story short, the governor ordered the Attorney General to find me, to fly me back to Oklahoma, so that the powers of the state of Oklahoma would join me to no longer be a single individual leading this fight, but they would help me in this effort. And so that's ultimately what happened. We appealed the case. The judge, the evil judge on the case, ultimately was fired and lost his pension. All 4 family members were ultimately convicted. They were sentenced, given various sentences and so forth. And at the end of the day, the children were liberated. They were free. They were taken away from this family. They have since been adopted by multiple families. and they're all doing very well. I'm still in contact with them.
Good.
They're all very productive and young women and doing very well in society. So that it was a good ending to the story.
And just to make all of us to understand why we are saying human trafficking in Liberia, the case of Maria Morgan Loken, is that these children came from her adoption program.
Correct.
She, the one who processed their documentation and turned them over to this family you're describing as evil family, giving their behavior. Is that what it is?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And you are also saying that these children are just few of the many other children that came to the United States and other part of the world, like Canada, you said, that passed through Maria adoption program.
It is worth noting that there were at least 2 children that I was told of that died under similar circumstances in other states.
Wow. All right. Thank you. And throughout from your following of this entire issue, you said to me between 2008 and 2012, about 1,200 children left Liberia through a program that Maria had connection to. That's 1,200 Liberian children.
2003 to 2008, correct.
2003 to 2008.
Right.
All right. I will bring my callers in, but let me ask the question quickly. Somebody might say, Maria did her part. Maria did not tell this family to treat these children the way they did. Do you have any feeling that Maria shared any responsibility in the way the children were treated and abused and humiliated in all forms and manner?
Yes, absolutely. Not only did I have feelings of her sharing responsibility, I had put it on my calendar to personally go to Minnesota and confront Maria about this. The time, as I mentioned, with all the things that were going on did not permit me to do that. But I interacted with 2 individuals that work with Maria, a Caucasian female and a Liberian male, that shared documentation with me, that also shared their testimony about how Maria's organization knowingly overlooked signals and signs that some of the families they were sending these children to were troubled family, overlooked these people's criminal histories, how in some cases I was even told that parents in like Banga or Bon County, they would be told that the children were being adopted. These parents would get the impression that these children were being sent to Monrovia and that they would be able to get in touch with these children only to find out that the children were overseas to never be able to get in touch with them. I was also told that there were on multiple occasions where parents would come to the Maria's office in Monrovia, and under the foreknowledge that they would come to see the children, etc., only to find out that the children were gone. I was told also that in many instances, when the exit interview was required at the U.S. Embassy, that Maria and her people would stage fictitious parents to go and represent as they were the parents of these kids, because in many of those situations, the real parents would not have been in agreement with the questions that would have been asked. And so, yeah, assuming all of those things to be true, of course, it has not been tried in a court of law under the weight of the rules of law, and thereby allowing Maria to defend herself. But from my perspective, working on the case at the time,
right,
with there was a death in California, as I mentioned, the Canada, all this stuff going on. I concluded based on that there was strong indication here that human trafficking had occurred and was going on. Thank you.
And one last question here, then I'll bring in my caller. And this one is one of our viewer here. The viewer here wrote this comment asking a question: did the parents get in touch with these children? Are they in touch with them now, the real parents in Liberia?
Yes, as I indicated, the mom died in child labor with the 5th child.
Okay.
The father, a Mr. Andrew, I personally got in touch with him. I talked to him.
Okay.
He was aware that the children were being adopted. So unlike the other parents' situation that I was told about, he was not tricked into the adoption. He knew they were being adopted, but certainly he was not aware of the kind of treatment that his children had endured and were enduring. So yes, I talked to the parent, the father. I put him in touch with the children on multiple occasions when I would go and pick up the children to visit with them. I would call him and they would also talk to him as well.
Thank you. Let me bring in my first caller, and those of you who want to participate to interact with Judge Johnson, the number is being pinned at the bottom of the live field there. Make sure you tap on it so you can see the number and the access code. You can place your call. We will restrict you to 1 minute because of time. Kesali Double, Kezo, your time to speak.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Anthony, and thanks to the judge, for coming on the show. I listened to him the last time when he was speaking on Untitled show, and it is good that you were able to have intervened in this case, and I hope you continue to intervene in as many cases as you have in Liberia. But my question is, how was this lady able to acquire a visa for such a huge amount of kids? How did they really go on? Was it some kind of a syndicate, that was formed along with the government and also some government official from the United States, or was it just her organization alone? And also probably getting in touch with you, I'll send you a couple of text messages and to get some, that is my private issue, so I can go and talk to you, Judge Johnson. Thank you very much.
The road to Judge Johnson is through Anthony Sear. I focus on Liberia. All right, Judge Johnson, keep that one.
All right, Anthony.
Yeah, keep that one. Let me bring in this other caller, Joe Moyo. Joe, welcome to Focus on Liberia. Quickly to the issue, you have a minute.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Sear, and thanks, Judge. The judge is very articulate and eloquent. It's a very, very troubling topic. But what I would like to ask the judge is that Maria Lukin or Maria Morgan or whatever her name is, can she actually be indicted for child trafficking? Because from what I learned from someone that's very close to the Liberian Gender Ministry, is that everything she did was legal, but she was just sloppy, and she had a tendency of exploiting the loopholes in, the child adoption system in Liberia. So, because if you look at the dictionary definition of child trafficking, it's hard to bring a case against her. So that's basically my question. And the cases of people have been adopting Liberians, probably 50. I met a young lady. She was adopted by, she said, Peace Corps from Liberia in 19. I think she was 50 years old. She said when she was 1 year old. So it appears as if this has been an ongoing situation in Liberia. But thank you, Judge, for bringing this story out. It's my first time hearing it, and yes, I mean, it's so traumatic, and I feel sorry for those kids. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Judge Thompson, let's take one more, and then you answer all three. Let's bring in Rose Joy. Welcome to Focus on Liberia. You have 1 minute, Rose.
Hello, good people. Also, I want to say hello to Melvin Johnson. Oh, a good friend of mine. Oh my God, I'm so excited to see you. It's been so many years. And also, I also want to acknowledge that I had a case with my kid at the age of 3, and Melvin gave me a strong advice, and I kind of won the case. I just want to appreciate him, but I never got the chance to tell him thank you. But, you know, I guess everything has time. But anyway, I kind of watched the lady talk about the whole situation on front page. And she had some people there that kind of verified that everything was done legally. So my thing is, it's kind of crazy because if you have people saying that, yes, I agree that I wanted my kids to come and have a better opportunity, and, you know, because my country is not better. So how do you put this woman to trial if a lot of people are still saying that it was the right process she went through, you know? But anyway, I also want to tell him thank you for the case, and I kind of heard it of front page, never followed it, but today was my first day. And thank you for the time.
Thank you, Rose. George, take those three quickly, then we will go back to the phone line.
Sure. Let me attempt to take them in the order that they came in. The first one was a Kesali, and I beg the indulgence. I would just use first names.
Yes, that's okay.
Kesali asked whether this was a syndicate that was going on, meaning whether this was being done in concert with other people, or whether Maria was acting alone. This was clearly, to me, when I reviewed everything at the time, all the information I gathered, as I mentioned, I still have hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents that I stored electronically from them that clearly indicated to me it was a syndicate. The reason I say clearly was anytime an individual, this is all alleged because Maria has not had an opportunity to go to court to defend this, but anytime it is alleged by employees, Caucasian and people of African descent in Liberia, and that you've got a situation where parents are being defrauded to have their children removed. They're being told one thing when the plan is something else. The parents are not aware that the children are even going for an interview to leave the country. People are being staged as the parents of these kids to successfully get through the interview. That prospective adoptive parents who have criminal history, such as this family that I fought against for some time, that have criminal history, their history is being ignored, that certain things are being covered up, brown envelopes are being passed, hands are being shaken to not pay attention to certain things. I think clearly, overwhelmingly, assuming that those things can be proved, assuming the documentation that were sent to me at the time were legitimate, I would clearly conclude that, yeah, there's a syndicate that's going on here. Joe was the second caller that asked, how was this being done legally? Whether there's still room to bring charges. And he also commented on the fact that adoption, this thing has been ongoing before this whole Maria incident, and in fact continues to this very day. I just got off the phone with somebody, I think earlier this week, that was shedding some light on some other stuff that I'm not at liberty to share right now. But yeah, this is an ongoing thing. Unfortunately, you have the haves in the world and you have the have-nots, and there's a motivation for the have-nots to want to be able to migrate, just like me and you and all of us here, into the land of the haves. And so because there's that motivation to do so, people take advantage of it. Yes, Joe, I do think charges can still be brought. My understanding of the jurisprudence of Liberia is that the statute of limitation for these type of charges have not expired. So yes, charges can still be brought. To Rose Joy, it's good to hear your voice again. Thank you for the kind words. You mentioned that you had seen on one of the news networks where Maria went on and she represented and brought people to attest on her behalf that she did everything legally. To you, Rose, and to the listening audience, unfortunately, we live in a very political is the politically correct word I will use. We live in a very political system. What I mean by that is when the news sources in Liberia are preparing to conduct such an interview, they are aware of the works that I've done because this story has been in the media for a very long time. Right. One would think that if they want to have a fair and objective show, that they would contact somebody like me that claims to have evidence to the contrary of what they're expecting to present. if not to call in, at least to give an input, at least to share some of the documentation with them, at least to interview me before doing that show, so as to try to present something balanced. But oftentimes what happens, and I never watched this, I don't know what network this is, so I'm speaking generally, but oftentimes what happens is that for, I would say, political reasons, a lot of interviews are staged so as to be skewed and presented one-sidedly. And so that may have been what happened. But certainly if anybody had contacted me, I don't see how anybody that's an activist or a journalist that's aware that a Liberian made these type of sacrifices, has this kind of documentation on this case, I don't see how anybody that wants to get to the bottom of this would not contact that individual and say, hey, I heard such and such, let's hear what you have. But I was never contacted, and so I didn't watch the show. And even if I was aware of the show, at minimum, I would have watched the show and probably would have called in if the opportunity existed, such as you did, Rose, to call in, but I wasn't aware. So I can tell you with some level of confidence that no, I don't think at all. I don't have anything personal against Ms. Lucan. I don't know the lady. I don't know her family or anything like that. But I can tell you objectively, reviewing the evidences that were presented to me at the time, the mountain of documents that I have, that I don't think one iota, there's not one iota of me that believes everything was done legally.
Thank you, Just Mervin. Let me bring in two callers here quickly. This one from phone number 7485, phone number ending in 7485. Your name and where you joining us from?
Yeah, my name is Martin Zenway. I'm calling from Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay, Mark, quickly.
Yes, Mr. Johnson, how you doing? I just want to thank you, and I want to thank you guys for the show. We really appreciate what you did as a parent. You know, myself, I have a girl and a boy, and I appreciate what you did. I know you are doing your job, but also you are doing a job for humanity. So thank you very much. You know, as a Liberian in Ohio, you know, I've been here since 92. And I have something similar, but it's not a child trafficking. My nephew was burned, and he was brought here for treatment. But when he came, there was just a whole bunch of things that happened. And his mother and father were left behind. So somebody else escorted him. So it's a whole bunch of things going on. And he was getting treatment in Boston and we in Ohio. So to cut long story short, things didn't go too right. And we ended up taking over the case, hiring a lawyer and doing all of this to get custody and immigration paperwork. So I know it's not the same, but I understand like some of the struggle you went through, you know, because we went through it for almost 3 years. And we're still going through it because he's here with us, you know. So I just want to say thank you just for the job that you do. You know, a lot of people won't understand, but I want to know if you're still working with the government of Liberia, and do you know if they have any mechanism in place to prevent this from happening again?
Thank you. All right, let me bring one more in. Just Johnson, caller with last four numbers 1954. Your name and where you joining us from?
My name is Howard Metzger, calling from Denver, Colorado.
Welcome to Focus on Liberia. You have a minute.
Thank you. Good evening, Judge, and good evening to the platform. I want to acknowledge the judge for his you know, his service in you know, this is actually as a public servant. I want to acknowledge him for, you know, putting Liberian first and remembering Liberian children. But going forward, I want to find out from the judge, as a legal expert on this platform, Liberia has been considered a transit country for human trafficking. Okay, there's one thing to do something good and then do it with the parties involved not being knowledgeable. So my question to the judge is, what mechanism can be put in place when it comes to the legality of adoption process in Liberia, that all parties involved will be, educated, on the process of how it works. Because some of the parents just did it, just for the betterment of their children, and not knowing that the legality part of it, that, I adopt a child, the legal parent, the adopted parents have all legal rights. Some of the parents from the stories I've been following was very ignorant to that process. Going forward, as Liberia being a transit country for human trafficking, and we are pushing our voices as justice advocates to limit these things, what mechanism do you think can be put in place to educate the parents with the law, and the law has to be firm, that people coming from other countries to adopt Liberian children, but also be cleared from the United States or other places in the world? Thank you.
Well, thank you for calling in. Those will be the last two callers, just Johnson. So respond to those quickly.
So the first caller, Martin, from Ohio, great state of Ohio, I believe he mentioned, he asked whether I was working with the government of Liberia to prevent some of this. That's part of the reason, Martin, and the listening audience, that I'm on this show, and I've been on some other shows, and will probably continue to do a circuit. The reason is to shed light on this widespread problem by highlighting not just what happened in 2008, 9, and 10 with these precious children with which I was involved, but the overall purpose is to bring awareness to what has happened and what is still happening, in an effort that we can get the leader of our country, George Weah, to do something publicly about this, acknowledging the issue, thereby discouraging those people who are evil-minded to traffic our children, at the same time encouraging those of us who are activists, who are well-meaning, to be able to step up and get involved as well. And so in terms of working with the government, in a sense, I'm trying to pressurize the government, if you will, by doing such program, but I'm not directly working with the government. Let me state out there that I have always been willing, as I was with the previous government, but it didn't work out. They maligned me, they lied on me and made me seem like the bad guy who was trying to make Liberia look bad. The same willingness I have to work with this government, to lend my expertise, to do the right thing for our people and for our nation. The second caller was Hawa. So he talked about the adoption process and what processes can be put in place. Unfortunately, Hawa, as private citizens, there's only but so much we can do. We can exercise our activism, as I am and you are, by participating. But in terms of the process and managing the process under the law, that is reserved within the auspices of the government, that we are not able to influence that or do anything with that. And so if, share this program with everybody that you're connected with. If you have connections to the government and the leadership of Liberia, encourage them to get in touch with people such as myself, activists, professionals, so that we can rub minds, as we say in Liberia. We can put minds together to find solution to this problem, because this is an ongoing problem. The horrific details, some of which I share, much of which I haven't shared, not only happened to these 5 precious children of mine, but it happened to others. As I mentioned, there were at least 2 deaths that I was told of during that time period. This thing is going on in Canada, America, and other places. And so this is a widespread problem that needs awareness and the involvement of as many of us as possible.
All right, I will read a few comments. This one from Appeton said, "Glory be to God." Margaret Johnson said, "Yes, Lord."
Amen.
This one from Musu Stewart, she received money from for all the children. Margaret, I read this one earlier. She was asking whether the children ever got in contact with their biological parent, and you answered that. This one said, "Judge Johnson, thanks for your persistent and undying commitment, she said, for your service to community and country." Musu again, what she did was illegal. The findings for adoption were fraudulent. Lawrence William writes, yes, they were the children. Yes, the way the children were adopted, he wrote. And then let me come to this one from Grace. Seriously, until Canada got scared and stopped the program from their country. Musu again, fraud. Anything is possible in that country. Let me see this one. Musu again, thanks so much for the revelation, sir, indeed, but good ending, praise God. Couple of comments from few of our followers here. One comment I saw earlier, I did not see while reading. One of the viewers is asking whether you can also help with immigration services. That's something you want to respond to? Well,
as you mentioned, you're my new manager, so.
I'm being appointed already?
Well, you mentioned that all roads to Johnson goes through you. So we can coordinate that offline, and let me just say categorically and publicly, I remain a servant. I remain a servant leader of our people. I remain a servant leader of Papa God, first of all, then our people. So absolutely, in any way that I can, let me speak to, I believe, better brother Kesserly that called first and indicated he was trying to get in touch with me. Let me say in this public manner, brother, I'm sorry if you were trying to get in touch with me. I will be on the lookout. And to you, if you have this information, when we get offline, if you would share that with me so I can communicate with him and do whatever I can to help. But yes, I remain a committed servant and a committed servant leader for our people. This is something I've been doing since the 90s. What are we in 2020? So it's something I've been doing for a while. As mentioned, this case we're talking about now occurred in Oklahoma. I've had multiple fights like these here in Georgia where I live. I've had death threats from police departments here in Georgia fighting against them. There was one situation where I had to have the FBI gave me a 90-day protection from death threats from me and my family. I've had to do this in Alabama. I suffered arrests multiple times, imprisonment multiple times for these. At one time, I was locked up under trump-up charges for 3 weeks. I've done this in Rhode Island, New Jersey, etc. And so this is leadership, and servant leadership is a labor of love for me. So I will continue to do it until Papa God redirects me in another direction. All right, our final caller is on the line. That caller is Jared. Jared, welcome to Focus on Liberia. You have 1 minute to interact with Judge Johnson. Quickly.
Thank you, Anthony. And I also want to say thank you to the judge for his humanitarian work he's doing. My question to the judge was, I know most of the cases he's been working on those cases from the United States. I was just curious as to whether it is also possible for him to pursue Maria Lucan in Liberia, in that jurisdiction, if that is possible, and if he's working on anything like that. Thank you very much, and I wanted to thank you to the judge for all of his good work.
Thank you. Judge Johnson, that will be the last one.
That's a very good question. Let me first preface what I'm about to say by saying I don't know Ms. Lucan or her family. I don't have anything personal against them, and I believe everybody under the law is innocent until proven guilty. I am expressing and have expressed and will continue to express that I do believe I've been exposed to sufficient evidence that clearly in my mind a crime was committed, but I am not empowered with the authority to be able to prosecute Maria or any of the other people involved. What I'm trying to do here is to bring awareness to what transpired, hopefully to trigger the authorities that have been elected, if you will, that are empowered with the ability to prosecute this case and others, to be able to try to prosecute it, to be able to contact people such as me and the many other people I work with to get to the bottom of these cases, to determine whether there is in fact a case, whether it's worth prosecution, and whether these individuals should be found guilty. So to directly answer the question, I'm not authorized nor empowered to prosecute, if you will, Maria, but I do have a lot of evidence that I believe led me to believe then, and I still hold that position, that a lot of fraud, a lot of illegalities, a lot of evil things were done that resulted in these children being exploited, raped, tortured, and even in some instances, as I mentioned previously, murdered.
Thank you all. Sis Johnson, I enjoyed my time with you here, and I'm happy that I was able to get a job since, you know, just from my first interview. That's a joke there. And we have come to the end, you know, of this very important conversation. You know, we started with what is human trafficking, and you were able to contrast human trafficking with the alarming rape cases that are going on in Liberia. You drew a parallel to give us a graphic understanding of the subject that we are discussing. And so I want you to go with that same route in closing. Rape, human trafficking, the impact on the victims, and then the case of Maria. Close.
Sure. Thank you. If I may, I beg your indulgence. I realize the way these shows work is that everybody that are on now and listening now don't come on at the same time.
Right.
And so sort of my introductory remarks that I made, putting out statistics out there to bring awareness, I just want to recap those again. And so today we're talking, of course, directly about human trafficking and what happened to my children in Oklahoma involving Maria Lukin. But the point here is that to encourage all of us to bring awareness, to get involved in as many ways as we can. Just some statistics to bring awareness to some of the happenings now. On April 22nd, about a month ago, in Bon County in Liberia, 8 men were arrested and charged with statutory rape. The judge in that case is said to have released those men. The government of Liberia, the government lawyers, the prosecutors, objecting and saying that the judge released those men without even notifying them. That normally the process, if the judge is going to release people charged with such crimes, the judge would at least notify both sides of the judge's intention so as to give both sides an opportunity to respond. But the government of Liberia lawyers are saying they were caught by surprise, that these 8 men are now free and will likely never be prosecuted for raping children in Bon County. On April 15th, in Nimba County, another man was alleged to have raped a 9-year-old girl and badly injuring her. When interviewed, the Justice Ministry representative, God Belesua, she indicated that she was aware of 20 such cases right there in Nimba County that were ongoing. She also indicated that she was aware of another 10 cases that they were appealing to the police to investigate that had not even been investigated. This is again happening about a month ago in Liberia, this one specifically in Nimba. On April 4th of this year, a 54-year-old, and let me cautiously say I love pastors, but we have to speak the truth against those who are not doing what they're doing, as this one is alleged to have done. But a 54-year-old United Methodist pastor was accused of raping a 15-year-old congregant. Fortunately, the authorities of the United Methodist Church in Liberia has removed this pastor while the case is ongoing. March of this year, about a month and a half ago, in Zone 9 in the Greater Monrovia area, a police officer, a CID supervisor, was called to investigate an alleged cell phone theft, an alleged theft of a bonanza, as we call it on ground.
Right.
And the person, the young lady who it was alleged took the cell phone, was 16 years old. She was taken reportedly, allegedly in the cell in the precinct and was raped by this supervisor in the precinct. And of course, we yet to find out what is going on with that case. She gave details about the rape and of course her injuries, and I understand she's receiving treatment for that. These are just to highlight. There are others. There was an 11-year-old that was sodomized, raped, allegedly by a Nigerian. Again, this is not to cast aspersion on a Nigerian. I'm just stating the facts as they were given to me. The Nigerian individual perpetrator, alleged perpetrator family have offered $1,500 to the victim and the victim's father so that the case would go away. The victim father has been pleading out for help. He's indicated that he earns $3 a day. $3 a day. He's been enticed with $1,500 to make the case go away. He also indicated that his daughter, due to the gross injury and tearings that she sustained, that her medical bills in Liberia run about $25 a day. So here is a father that's crying, lamenting for his daughter. He only earns $3 a day to feed the family and do everything else that the provider would try to do under those circumstances, but is faced with temptation of $1,500 to make this go away, while he's also faced with $25 a day medical bills. There was a 12-year-old student. You can imagine somebody 12 years old in middle school that was raped allegedly by her teacher. There's a stepfather that allegedly raped and impregnated his 14-year-old stepdaughter. Just to give you an idea, last year alone, in the year 2019, there's been 500 of such cases that were reported. Now, these are cases that are reported. We all know the culture, the tradition, the system we come from, because of the different dynamics economically and shifting of powers, that all of these cases are not reported. So these are just the ones that are reported that are 500. And of course, I try to shed light on the case that I was directly involved in Oklahoma. My hope, my purpose of doing this show, and hopefully to do as many shows as God would permit me, is not only to share my personal testimony of what I went through and what God did ultimately, but to also encourage all of us as activists, because there's activism in all of us, okay? And so that the same way as I mentioned some of the miracles that God worked out for me when I committed to what I felt was his calls, I want to say to all of you and encourage you that you can also endeavor to do the same, and God can work the same miracles in you. I also want to, my purpose of doing this is to encourage you, the listening audience, to take the lead and to be encouraged for such a fight. The word of God says, and specifically Christ Jesus himself says, that what we do for and what we do to the least among us, we've done unto him. So let's do unto Christ rightfully. And lastly, I'm doing this to hopefully make an appeal to get the attention of the government of Liberia, to encourage them to bring about prompt, quick, and fair arrests and prosecution of these cases. As mentioned by this government official, Ms. Bele Sua in Nimba County, there are 30 cases in Nimba County so far that have not been prosecuted. 30 cases in one county. So hopefully this will bring some attention to the government to get involved, President Weah to get involved. And lastly, I'm hoping that the president would either create, if it hasn't been created, or if they have created it, to maintain and dust up the idea of publishing some statistics on these cases, because the statistics, they bring awareness to this situation, and awareness brings light. Light discourages evil people from doing stuff. Light also encourages good people to become activists, to get involved, and to help our children. And so that's my purpose, and that's what has happened. You had indicated earlier, Brother C.A., some of the distinction we talked about between rape and trafficking. I mentioned earlier, they're both the same. They're both very evil. They're both intended to destroy the victim. The word of God says that the enemy and the enemy's agents, they come to do but three things. They come to kill, they come to steal, and they come to destroy. And basically, this is what evil perpetrators of rape and or human trafficking try to do. And so my prayer is that, this program will be touched with the blood of Jesus, and the Holy Spirit will touch people's hearts to do something to help the least among us.
So Johnson, we can't thank you enough for that very powerful closing statement. On that note, folks in cyberspace, we also want to say thank you for following our broadcast here today. We want to remind you to always like our Facebook page so you can get notification, and also our YouTube page, because all of our programs here can be loaded up to YouTube, usually 2-3 hours after it's been broadcast here live on Facebook. It is important also that we do so because we are documenting, we are writing history, we are writing a Liberian history. Some people don't have the ability to read, so that they can go on YouTube and access the information, and maybe with that information, we can be able to tread that path to that better Liberia, that glorious level of liberty that Johnson is advocating for, that I'm